In a glass jar filled with formaldehyde, in the psychology department of Cornell University, is kept one of the most infamous brains in the criminal history of America. It belonged to a man who spoke 8 languages fluently, translated ancient Greek texts, and formulated complex theories in the field of human linguistics. And yet, this same brilliant mind orchestrated brutal murders that shocked America in the 19th century. This brain belonged to Edward Howard Rulloff, teacher, doctor, inventor, philologist, and killer. For decades, the authorities of New York State tried to understand how such intellectual brilliance could coexist with such cold-blooded evil. Today, we uncover the chilling truth about the man newspapers dubbed the genius killer. This is a story of academic ambition paid in blood, with a pursuit of knowledge turned into an obsession that justified murder. The case of Edward Rulloff forever changed Americans' views on the criminal mind, proving that evil can wear the mask of scholarly respectability, and that genius itself can become a weapon of destruction. The year was 1842. The rolling hills of central New York were full of opportunity and change. The Erie Canal had transformed sleepy farming communities into bustling trade centers. Education was becoming a path to prosperity in the new America, and small towns competed to attract educated men who could raise their cultural status. It was into this landscape of hope and progress that a young man named Edward Rulloff arrived in the village of Dryden, east of Ithaca. To the locals, he seemed a gift from above. Rulloff was 23 years old, tall and imposing, with a commanding appearance. He stood out immediately among the rough laborers and farmers. His dark hair was carefully styled, his clothes neat and scholarly, and his piercing dark eyes seemed to conceal depths of knowledge that astonished everyone he met. When he spoke, it was with the refined accent of an educated gentleman, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to and respected, something the residents of Dryden rarely encountered in a man of such obvious erudition. Rulloff claimed to possess vast knowledge of botany and medicine, could easily recite passages in Latin, Greek, and German, and seemed equally comfortable discussing philosophy, literature, and the emerging sciences. When he began lecturing on phrenology, the popular pseudoscience of reading character through skull measurements, the townspeople gathered in amazement, captivated by his apparent mastery of this fashionable field of knowledge. But beneath this impressive exterior lay secrets that would have horrified his admirers. Born as John Edward Howard Rulloff's son near St. John, New Brunswick, around 1819 or 1820, he was already leading a double life before moving to the United States. His intellectual abilities were tainted early by a pull toward crime. By his teenage years, Edward had been caught in a series of suspicious arsons at a dry goods store where he worked, apparently to cover up theft of inventory. When he was seen wearing clothes matching the stolen items, he was convicted of embezzlement and sentenced to 2 years in prison. This experience should have been a warning, but instead it became his criminal education, teaching him the value of careful planning and the importance of maintaining a respectable facade. After his release, he moved to the United States, abandoning his birth name for the more distinguished Edward Rulloff. The change was more than cosmetic. It symbolized his transformation from an ordinary criminal into something far more dangerous, a predator who could blend seamlessly into respectable society. In Dryden, Rulloff quickly established himself as a valuable member of the community. He found work as a clerk in a local pharmacy, where his apparent knowledge of botanical medicines impressed both his employer and the customers. His reputation grew rapidly. Soon, the community offered him the position of principal at the local school, granting him not only respectability, but also access to young minds he could influence and potentially corrupt. Among his students was 17-year-old Harriet Shutt, daughter of one of the most respected farming families in the county. Harriet was considered a rare beauty, tall and slender, with long light brown hair, pale skin, and hazel eyes that sparkled with intelligence and gentle humor. The Shutt family had great hopes for her future marriage. The attraction between teacher and student was immediate and powerful, though built on the most dangerous foundation imaginable. Yet even in these early days of courtship, warning signs appeared, signs the people around them chose to ignore or rationalize. When provoked, Rulloff's anger could be terrifying in its intensity, and it seemed unpredictable. He displayed an almost pathological jealousy whenever other men showed even innocent interest in Harriet, and his mood could shift from charming cheerfulness to cold, calculating rage in seconds. Marriage and the birth of a child. On December 31, 1843, Edward and Harriet married. The wedding should have been a joyful event. But even that day, Rulloff's true nature revealed itself in a way that should have alarmed everyone present. The ceremony proceeded normally until the traditional moment when the minister, following long custom, congratulated the bride with a gentle kiss on the cheek. In that instant, Rulloff's carefully maintained facade cracked, exposing the vicious jealousy that would define their marriage. His face darkened with such fury that several guests recoiled in unease. The guests, unsure how to interpret this troubling outburst, dismissed it as wedding day nerves. But Harriet herself saw something in her new husband's eyes that chilled her to the bone. Soon after the wedding, Rulloff persuaded Harriet to move with him to the neighboring village of Lansing, ostensibly for privacy to build their new life, but in truth to isolate his young wife from the protective influence of her family. In April 1845, after more than a year of marriage, Harriet gave birth to a daughter they named Priscilla. Tragedy and suspicion. For a short time, the arrival of their child seemed to calm Rulloff's volatile nature. But domestic peace was soon disturbed by the constant presence of Dr. Henry Bull, Rulloff's business partner and Harriet's cousin. Dr. Bull's habit of greeting Harriet with a kiss on the cheek, the same innocent gesture that had enraged Rulloff on his wedding day, drove him into paroxysms of jealous rage. Convinced that his wife was having an affair with her cousin, despite the complete lack of evidence, Rulloff's jealousy grew to dangerous proportions as spring turned into summer in 1845. He began following Harriet whenever she left the house. The crisis that would shatter several families began in May 1845, when tragedy struck the extended Shutt clan. Harriet's sister-in-law, the wife of her brother William, fell gravely ill shortly after giving birth to her second child. Rulloff offered to treat her, preparing an herbal remedy using his botanical knowledge. Within 48 hours of receiving Rulloff's treatment, both the young mother and her newborn child were dead. After their deaths, Rulloff showed no grief. Instead, he made a sinister remark to his mother-in-law about who might be next. The Shutt family began to suspect and resent him, creating a powder keg atmosphere that was soon to explode into violence. Feeling the weight of suspicion from his in-laws and growing increasingly desperate, Rulloff became more determined than ever to persuade Harriet to abandon her family and move with him to Ohio. But Harriet, still mourning the loss of her sister-in-law and niece, refused to leave her family in such a difficult time. Their arguments about the future became more frequent and more violent on the evening of June 22, 1844, as a summer storm thundered over Cayuga Lake and lightning lit the darkening sky. Edward Rulloff committed the crime that defined his legacy. Exploding in a fit of pure rage, fueled by months of growing resentment and paranoid jealousy, Rulloff snatched a heavy iron pestle from his wife's hands and brought it crashing down on her forehead with devastating force. The blow was delivered with such brutality that Harriet collapsed instantly. Blood poured from the massive wound and pooled beneath her head on the kitchen floor. Their little daughter, Priscilla, began to cry in her cradle, disturbed by the noise. With the same calculating coldness that marked his scientific pursuits, Rulloff made another horrific decision. Moving to his collection of botanical medicines, he prepared what he later called a narcotic. Rulloff administered the poison with gentle hands, perhaps telling himself he was only lulling the child to sleep. The baby's cries gradually weakened, then ceased entirely. The disappearance of Harriet and Priscilla in late June 1844 shocked the tight-knit community of Lansing. When concerned neighbors came the next day to check on Rulloff, they found him alone in the house. His explanations immediately aroused deep suspicion. He tried to explain his family's absence, but his stories changed each time. Why had Harriet left without her beloved travel basket and personal belongings? More and more people became convinced that something terrible had happened to his wife and child. When the pressure of the investigation and the community's suspicions became too much, Rulloff suddenly vanished from Lansing. But Ephraim Shutt was not about to let the suspected murderer of his sister escape justice. He gave chase, beginning a dramatic manhunt across the state. The pursuit reached its climax at a busy train platform in Rochester, where Ephraim spotted Rulloff attempting to board a departing train bound for Buffalo. Even then, Rulloff maintained his composure and continued his deceit with startling boldness. He even suggested that Ephraim accompany him on the trip to see for himself that his sister and niece were safe. Rulloff was finally tracked down and arrested in 1845, nearly a year after Harriet and Priscilla disappeared. With no bodies, no physical evidence, and no witnesses, the prosecution was forced to build its case entirely on circumstantial evidence. Rulloff conducted his own defense with skill and sophistication that amazed the courtroom observers. In 1846, he was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 10 years of hard labor in Orange State Prison. Prison did not break his spirit. It became his university and laboratory. He obsessively devoted himself to scholarly study, using his confinement to pursue philology, the scientific study of the development and evolution of language. He genuinely believed this work would make him one of the foremost linguists of his generation and grant him immortality in academic circles. Among those most influenced by Rulloff's apparent reform and scientific achievements was Albert Jarvis, the teenage son of the deputy sheriff of Ithaca. Jarvis, already fascinated with classical studies, became Rulloff's most devoted disciple, and their relationship would prove crucial to Rulloff's future escapes and criminal enterprises. Rulloff continued his criminal life, forming a gang that terrorized the Northeast for nearly a decade. In 1869, he learned of the first meeting of the American Philological Association, to be held in Poughkeepsie, and saw in it his golden opportunity to break into legitimate academic circles. Under the carefully crafted pseudonym Professor Jury Loria, he submitted a manuscript detailing his revolutionary theory of language formation. But when the association not only rejected his manuscript, but showed no interest at all in his theories, Rulloff's rage was volcanic and transformative. If the world would not recognize his genius voluntarily, he would force them to acknowledge him through ever bolder and more violent crimes. It was during this period of escalating violence and desperation that Rulloff's true psychopathic nature became most evident. On August 17, 1870, Rulloff, Albert Jarvis, and William Dexter attempted to rob the Hulbert Brothers dry goods store in Binghamton. Their plans seemed flawless, but a single mistake unraveled everything. Jarvis, despite years of criminal experience, stumbled over an unseen obstacle. The noise awakened the clerks, who rushed to confront them. In the panic, Rulloff shot and killed one of the clerks, Frederick Merrick. The three criminals fled in terror, heading toward the Chenango River, where they believed they could escape safely under cover of darkness. But Rulloff made another fatal error. He convinced his partners that the river was shallow enough to wade across. This was false. Jarvis and Dexter drowned, while Rulloff barely survived. His attempt to flee Binghamton on foot proved no more successful. At the train station, when police asked him to identify himself, he made the decisive mistake of running, immediately revealing himself as the criminal. Even in custody, Rulloff clung to his lifelong pattern of deception and manipulation, first giving his name as Charles Augustus, then George Williams. But his past finally caught up with him in the person of Judge Ransom Balcom, who immediately recognized the infamous fugitive. The trial, which began on January 4th, 1871, became a sensation, drawing as many as 2,000 people each day. As before, Rulloff conducted his own defense, but this time the evidence was overwhelming. On March 3, 1871, Edward Howard Rulloff was sentenced to hang for the murder of Frederick Merrick. While awaiting execution, he finally confessed to the murder of his wife Harriet, but never admitted to killing his daughter Priscilla. On May 18, 1871, Edward Howard Rulloff met his death on the gallows. Even after his death, Rulloff's story continued to fascinate and horrify the public. Dr. Burt Wilder of Cornell University extracted his brain within hours of the execution for scientific study, declaring it the second largest criminal brain on record at that time. The brain remains on display in Cornell's Wilder Brain Collection to this day. The Rulloff case forced 19th century America to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of intellect, morality, and criminal behavior. His story challenged the prevailing belief that criminality was tied to low intelligence and social class, proving instead that evil can wear the mask of respectability, and that intellectual brilliance is no guarantee of moral character. His story anticipated many of the themes that would later define modern understanding of serial killers and psychopaths. A charming facade concealing murderous intent, a grandiose sense of self-importance that justified any action, a complete lack of empathy for others' suffering, and the ability to manipulate those around him through displays of intelligence and charisma.